Here's another rule that will help you apply the principle of parallelism. Use parallelism to link related ideas and emphasize the relationships among them. Very often when we write English sentences, we are including two or more ideas in the same sentence that have some close relationship to one another. Sometimes those ideas help to prove or demonstrate the same point. In other cases, the two ideas may have a relationship of contrast, that is, they disagree with one another. In either case, it's desirable to follow the principle of parallelism, that is, to show and emphasize the relationship between the ideas by setting them up in grammatically parallel form. When you do this, your sentences read well, and the relationship between the ideas is very clear. The readers of your sentence will immediately see the relationship between the ideas and understand it, and will see how the ideas fit together. Here's an example. Love of country is admirable, but today it is necessary to love humanity in general. Now, this sentence is not grammatically wrong. That is, it doesn't contain an out-and-out error. However, it does violate the principle of parallelism, and therefore it's not as well written as it ought to be. How does it violate parallelism? Well, remember the rule we just looked at. When we have related ideas in a sentence, it's desirable to use parallelism to link them and to emphasize the relationship between them. This sentence contains two ideas. First, that love of country is admirable. Second, that today it's necessary to love humanity in general. In other words, to love people no matter where they come from. Now, the author of this sentence is setting up a clear relationship between these two ideas. The relationship is one of contrast. Notice that the conjunction but has been used to join these two ideas. The author is trying to say, one thing is true, but today something else is also true. So here are two ideas that are closely related and have a contrast to one another, and both deal with love of various kinds. So the two ideas are clearly related, and yet they haven't been set up in grammatically parallel form. The first clause says love of country is admirable. The second clause doesn't refer to love of humanity. Instead, it changes the grammatical form and says it is necessary to love humanity in general. Therefore, the two clauses are not set up in grammatically similar form. However, it would be easy to rewrite the sentence to make the two clauses parallel or grammatically similar. And when we do this, the sentence becomes much more forceful, and the contrast between the two ideas becomes much more clear. Here's how we would rewrite the sentence to follow this principle of parallelism. Love of country is admirable, but today, love of humanity is necessary. When we rewrite the sentence this way, the contrast between two kinds of love has been emphasized. Love of country, love of humanity. And we're told that the first kind of love is admirable, but that today the second kind is necessary. So the contrast between the two ideas and the author's point becomes that much more vivid and that much more clear. And that's why parallelism improves the sentence. So remember the rule. When related ideas appear in your sentence, try to follow the principle of parallelism in order to link those ideas and emphasize how they're related to one another. Our third rule, again, is not specifically a grammar rule, but rather a rule that applies as a principle of good writing. When using parallel construction, build to a climax. What does this mean? Well, as we've seen, parallelism is used to link ideas, and it's often used in particular when ideas are being listed, when 2, 3, 4, or more items are being presented in sequence. Now, the basic rule of good writing is that when you're presenting a number of ideas in a sequence, it's best to end with the most interesting, most important, or most dramatic item. If instead you end with an item which is less important, less interesting, or less dramatic than the preceding items, suddenly your sentence will sound a little funny. The idea that you're trying to get across will come a little flat, and the reader may even be distracted by the fact that there's been a sudden fall off. Rather than a steady climb in emotion, we have a climb and then a sudden decline, which is very distracting. It can be used for comic effect, but not when you're trying to write a serious sentence. Here's an example of a sentence that violates this rule of building to a climax. Visitors to America's heartland fall in love with the fields of waving grain, the endless skies, and the giant hamburgers. Now, if the author of this sentence was trying to write a humorous essay or make a funny remark, it might work, because the third item in this list, the giant hamburgers, sounds much less grand and exalted and serious than the first two, the fields of waving grain and the endless skies. Rather than building to a climax, this sentence gradually builds and then suddenly falls flat on its face, with the rather comic image of giant hamburgers being thrown in alongside the grandeur of American landscapes. So the author of this sentence has not built to a climax, but instead has fallen down at the last moment, and therefore the sentence sounds rather funny. Now, if you're trying to write humor, then by all means use this technique, because it does create a comic effect. But when you're trying to write a serious sentence, remember this rule: build to a climax and make the items in your list get gradually more important, more impressive, and more dramatic. And that way you will leave the reader with the most emphatic item and therefore have the greatest effect on the reader's feelings. Let's try now an exercise that will enable you to test your understanding of the basic rules that we've looked at in this lesson. Turn to your study guide, try your hand at the sample sentences that are given there, and when you're finished, come back to this program, and we'll take a look at those questions together.